Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. Today's video is part 3 of a mini series that we're doing. It is a competition argument prompt to help you prepare for AP Lang question 3. If you're hoping to get a little extra practice, there are going to be times during this video where I will cue you to pause the video. That way you can write your own answers before moving on. The essential question that we're trying to answer is, to what extent is competition harmful? So in part 1, we talked about how claims exist on a spectrum. So we want to try to avoid the absolutes of always and never. We also brainstormed reasons why competition might be healthy and why it might be unhealthy. And then in part 2, we brainstormed specific evidence that we could include in our essay. Also in part 2, we talked about the difference between general, somewhat specific, and specific evidence, because for AP Lang, it's really important that you focus on specific evidence as opposed to hypotheticals or generalizations. Also, a lot of times students convey their evidence in a somewhat specific way. So they do have some facts, but maybe it's not as developed as it needs to be, so it doesn't seem as credible. So we really want to focus on different examples that we could write about very thoroughly in a very credible and believable way. So what I want you to do now is look at all of your examples from part 2, and I want you to narrow down your list. So anything that you labeled as something you would have specific knowledge about, you put an S by it. I want you to take those and put them in a new list. Narrow it down to your top 4 to 6 examples. And then as you're doing that, the next step is to pair the examples. So this could be because they came from the same category. We use the acronym CHORES, which stands for current events, history, outside knowledge, reading, experiences, and science. So it could be that they're related because they come from the same type of category, like maybe they're both from history. Or they could be related because one is like a real world example, maybe one's a personal experience example. So looking at your evidence, go ahead and take a minute to not only list your top 4 to 6, but once you've done that, see if you can create pairs among those 4 to 6. Go ahead and hit pause now and then hit play when you're ready to continue. So I wanted to show you guys a couple examples of pairs that my own students created in case this helps you understand the concept better. So this particular example was that there are 2 pole vaulters from our state who actually competed in the Olympic trials. They're sisters, and one made the Olympic team, the other did not. My student who wrote about this is also a pole vaulter. So the idea was to go from this like outside knowledge sports example to a personal example. So you can see the line of reasoning starting there. So we want to think about the relationship between the examples. And also we want to think about what these examples demonstrate or what they reveal, because that's going to be helping us as we work toward commentary later in the video. So one of the things that I had my students do was try to figure out some possible transitions between the 2 layers here. So when I say layers, I mean like an example is a layer. So evidence and commentary, evidence and the commentary about that evidence is a layer. And then chances are you're going to have 2 layers per paragraph to really prove your claim. So we want to transition from layer 1, in this case, the example of Tori and Lexi Weeks, to layer 2, which would be the personal experience. And part of the reason why I would consider this example specific evidence is because when my student wrote the paragraph about this, he was able to talk about how both of them had competed and made each other better. They knew there was only one spot on the Olympic team, so one would make it and one didn't. and he knew which one made it. I personally can't remember off the top of my head, but one made it, one didn't. But the sister who didn't still went to the Olympics to support the sister that did. So he knew all this knowledge, which made it very believable. As a writer, I trusted that he knew what he was talking about. And then for the personal experience, he gave a lot of details about his own personal struggle, how he was competing against a teammate to try to be number one on the team, and then the effects of that as well. So usually personal experience is a little bit easier to be specific about because it's your own life. But at the same time, you got to be careful because your reader doesn't know all the backstory. So that's why I would consider this specific evidence. These are just notes, but as it was executed, it was very specific. So now let's look at one more example. This particular example takes more of a historical approach. So a lot of times students who are in either APUSH or AP World are able to draw upon that content in their Q3 essays. So this student wrote about the rivalry or competition between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, and then compared that to the railroad industry. So we went from sort of like an individual competition in politics to a business-wide competition. And one of the things that I liked about how this student wrote the paragraph is that the student was able to tell me exactly what Alexander Hamilton's platform was versus Thomas Jefferson's. So why were they actually each other's competitors? Because a couple other students tried to write about this same example as well, but they were too general. They basically just said they were political rivals, but they didn't really tell me why they were rivals. So remember, with specific knowledge, you have to be able to clue the reader in order to make sure that it's proving that you're answering the question. So just saying that they're rivals really doesn't help me understand the competition between them. So in this case, our line of reasoning goes from like politicians and history to like businesses and history, the railroad industry. And so I also had the student note some possible transitions as well, so we know how they're going to move from one layer of evidence to the next within the same paragraph. Earlier in this video, I mentioned the phrase line of reasoning. So if I could give students any advice about question 3, it would be this. You need to understand what specific evidence actually means. You also need to know how to create a line of reasoning. That's going to help you be more successful when writing an essay. So let's talk about what a line of reasoning is. Because quite frankly, as a teacher, I realized very quickly that even though some students had specific evidence, their essay still kind of felt disjointed. And other students had specific evidence, but their essay seemed to flow better. So I asked myself, okay, what's the difference? What is the second group of students doing that the first group isn't? And to me, the biggest difference was that the second group had better transitions. They had a better flow of ideas. And so a line of reasoning is a logical, coherent argument. Now, that sounds really easy, but when you think about it, it's a lot harder because you really need to plan the order of your evidence within a paragraph and how you're going to transition between that evidence, and also the order of your paragraphs. Because basically, if I were to take your essay, let's take your body paragraphs. If I were to take those body paragraphs and cut them up and put them on an index card and give them to a student and tell them, hey, put these in the right order. If you have a strong line of reasoning, they can do it very easily. But if you don't have a strong line of reasoning, they're not going to know which paragraph is first, second, or even third if there is a third body paragraph. So a line of reasoning means that there's a clear order. So how do you actually create this? Well, first of all, at the paragraph level, you want to transition from one layer of evidence to another. Between your paragraphs, you want to use your topic sentences in order to create a bridge between those paragraphs. So connect your ideas. That will really help. And just as a bonus tip, an exercise that helped some of my students understand line of reasoning better is we looked at some Q3 sample essays from the College Board that scored either a 5 or a 6. And I had them trace the line of reasoning. So we looked at those transitions and those topic sentences to figure out how the argument flowed. And if there were phrases that we liked, we talked about those as well. And then students were able to sort of use that as a model the next time that they wrote. So now that you've decided on your specific evidence and you've paired your evidence together, I want you to ask yourself, what is the best order of this evidence? So think about this at the paragraph level. So which evidence should be first, which evidence should be second, but then also think about it in terms of like the main idea. So which main idea should belong in paragraph 1, and then which main idea should belong in paragraph 2. And if you're gonna go for a third paragraph, obviously plan for that as well. So take a second to pause the video, answer the questions on the screen, and then when you're ready, go ahead and hit play to resume. So now that you know the main idea of each of your body paragraphs, as well as which evidence you're going to use to prove that claim, now we need to start thinking about commentary, because in row B of the AP Lang rubric, it's called evidence and commentary. So these two things need to go together. And typically speaking, the commentary follows the evidence. You want to try to aim for more commentary than evidence because the commentary is your analysis. It's you explaining the significance of the evidence and connecting it back to your thesis. So this is where your own ideas and original thoughts should shine through. So you might be wondering, okay, but how do I actually create commentary? Like, what is that? Well, because commentary is your analysis, you want to ask yourself, what does this evidence reveal about competition? What's the deeper message? So basically, what does your example tell us about the nature of competition? Does it show that it's helpful or harmful? Or does it show that it's sometimes helpful but sometimes harmful? So we want to dig deeper here. We want to address the prompt. So we want to figure out, what does this tell us about competition? What's the deeper meaning here? Does it tell us something about society? What are we supposed to conclude from this evidence? So then you also want to use stronger verbs in order to convey that commentary. So I've included some verbs on the slide here. I recommend that students use these verbs or similar ones: illustrates, highlights, suggests, implies, demonstrates, those kind of stronger verbs to help lead into their commentary. So if you're getting stuck with commentary, use one of these verbs to help you figure out what it's actually revealing about competition. So now we're going to actually try to put that into action. We're going to try to plan our commentary. So I want you to list out your evidence in the order that it's going to appear in your essay, because that's your line of reasoning. So let's say you have 2 body paragraphs with 2 layers in that body paragraph. That would be 4 pieces of evidence. So you can label it however you want to, but I want you to figure out what is the commentary you're going to write about for that piece of evidence. So you can do it in bullet points if you want to, or complete sentences, but try to include one of those verbs from the previous slide. That way you're leading into your commentary. So if you're following along with the video, go ahead and hit pause now. That way you can write your commentary, and then when you're ready, go ahead and hit play. If you guys have enjoyed this mini series, do me a huge favor and go ahead and hit that like button, because that lets other teachers and students know that this channel might be of value to them as well. Make sure that you are subscribed with your notifications turned on so you don't miss any upcoming videos. And until next time, happy writing!